coming to the Iowa Historical Society Now and Then Lecture Series. We're honored again today, to have Larry Dorsey and his history and information about the black diamonds and silver rails, which I think you can probably figure out that clue. He's also a retired history teacher from the Boulder Valley School District, and then he is emeritus with the Colorado Railroad Museum that's in Boulder. And they always have Boulder County days. I don't know if they're going to this year. Yes, okay, good. And you get a discount or you get in free. So if you haven't been to the Railroad Museum, it's a great opportunity. Larry was our first season of Now and Then Lectures. That was 2011. And he's come back a few times. He doesn't tell me no. So, thank you, Larry, and have a good afternoon.
Well, thank you, Kathy. It's always a pleasure to be here at Niwot in this wonderful historic old building, the Left-Hand Grange. I find these Grange halls very interesting. I was thinking of, I think between here and Wheat Ridge, there's probably about 10 or 12 of these old structures, and I think a group of faithful people are keeping them maintained and in order. That's congratulations to all of you who have a part in this building and the Niwot Historical Society. So 2000, what did you say, 11?
Yeah, 2011.
Yeah. Well, I think this is maybe the 5th presentation I've made, and again, it's a pleasure to be here and share some of the stuff I know. And I'm doing one of the one or two caveats before we get started. One is that I don't consider myself an expert. I happen to be interested in this sort of thing and like sharing what I've learned or know. And so you're either in for something that should be educational tonight, or oh, Kathy, did you check, make sure no one brought any rotten tomatoes in with them today? I hope so, because I'm not quite as agile about dodging stuff like I used to be. But as Kathy said, I used to teach here in the Boulder Valley District, not here, it's the next one down, at Fairview and Boulder High and at Centaurus High Schools. And history just got to be something that I was always interested in to some extent, and then became my professional orientation. And I'm really happy I'm able to keep that going in my retirement. So I am involved with the Colorado Railroad Museum. I'm no longer an emeritus. They brought me in off the bench to fill in on the Board of Trustees for when someone had to resign. So pretty involved in the history stuff. I have a few slides I'll show you about the Marshall Fire effects on our museum. And so we have the Superior Historical Commission. It's just a group of us, an arm of the town government, where we do what we can to preserve and enhance the memory of Old Superior, which is a problem now since it essentially got destroyed in the Marshall Fire. I think there's 3 historic buildings left in Superior that would be eligible for landmarking. So that means we lost about 40 some buildings that were that old, plus the ones that were newer than that. So that's been a tough thing. Well, and also we've had the COVID issue, and so it's nice to be able to have in-person meetings. And it's nice. Raise your hand if you're here today. Oh, no, I didn't get very many responses there. I don't know what that means exactly. So at any rate, we'll hopefully be able to continue to have these in-person experiences like this to your benefit, we hope. So a little bit of background on why I came up with this program. I do some outreach programs for the Railroad Museum, and occasionally someone will call and say, hey, we'd like a program on whatever it is. And so a bunch of people who lived in a senior residence in Littleton called and we want to know more about why there's so darn many trains coming through Littleton loaded with coal. Where are they coming from? Where are they going? And why are they tooting their horns all the time? And so that's what led to this. And so one day I was talking to Kathy. She asked me if I'd be interested in doing another program. Oh, I got this one about the coal trains. I bet everybody in Niwot would like to know why there's so many coal trains coming through Niwot. And she looked at me like, huh? And decided, said, I don't remember seeing that many coal trains. Well, I learned something in the process of putting this back together again, and that is you don't have very many that go through Niwot, but you might have one a day. So maybe this will explain to you, though, when you're going into Denver and you see one after another clogged up down in the central part of Denver, the old rail yards, which have been turned into some massive sea of condominiums, it looks like. Anyway, that's the background. So luckily, I'll explain why you don't have any 12 or 15 or 20 trains a day coming through Niwot and Boulder. Now, and you can see I feel very strongly about being prepared, the old Boy Scout motto and all that sort of thing. So I hope I've got this planned out well enough for you today. And of course, I don't want to offend anyone here, and so I won't be checking IDs, but those make sure you aren't wearing your hats in such a way to block the viewer behind you. And can't leave out the boys here either, so no spitting on the floor and no cussing, okay? Well, here's a picture of our former museum. It was in Superior. It was a mine camp house. That means it was in the camp of over 20 of these little houses right by the industrial coal mine in Superior. And an interior shot. They were very small, 24 feet by 24 feet, and square. And sadly, it was destroyed in the fire. And that's what it looked like before we had the debris removed. So as of now, the debris has all been mucked out of the basement, and now the basement walls have been taken down. I learned something here too. I kept asking, why is the concrete foundation not viable anymore? And I finally learned that it's because of the rebar, the reinforcing bars of steel that are in the concrete. Those got so hot that it compromised the concrete. And so this will be our museum in the future. So we're in the process of brainstorming how we can utilize the space. This is 1904 house in Superior by our park called Grasso Park. It was this building, well, right across the back of it, you can see there's no houses in back of it because the fire burned right up to that little street and changed direction. And all of our historic buildings in Superior, in the in the Grasso Park, survived. So to start this odyssey about transportation of coal, we'll take a real quick look at history of Colorado rails. And when the Transcontinental Railroad was built to bypass Denver and that area, because obviously we have great range of mountains to the west of Denver, which made for some steep railroading. So they went straight up into Wyoming to Cheyenne and created Cheyenne. And they also, though, clipped the northeast corner of Colorado up by Julesburg. So about 8 miles of track on the Transcontinental went through Colorado. 1860, this is 1867, and Colorado was completed in 1869. So at one time when Julesburg was at the western terminus of the railroad, it was called the wickedest city in the West. Can you imagine Julesburg, Colorado, and the way it is today anyway, being a wild and woolly place. But every time they get to a certain distance, they'd have a new town be the western terminus of the railroad, and it turned out became the wickedest city. And then in bypassing Denver, the head of the Union Pacific Railroad said, "Oh, Denver's too dead to bury even," And so Denver was feeling left out. It's kind of like when a town gets left off of the interstate highway, and it starts deteriorating or whatever. So in 1870, the main financial and political mucky mucks of Denver financed a railroad from Denver to Cheyenne, and that way they could connect. It was one of the ways they could connect to the Transcontinental Railroad, 1870. So in Niwot, you probably know that Ann Denny wrote this wonderful little book, collection of her essays, calling it the birth of a railroad town. So Niwot's past is really linked to the railroads, because in south part of Boulder County and out into Weld County, it's coal mining. Up in the mountains of Boulder County is hard rock mining. But here in this valley, part of the valley, is agriculture. And so to move the agricultural products, they made Niwot be close to the railroad. It was built in here in 1873. And here's the Niwot Depot in the 1880s, just a few hundred yards from here. And here's an example of why it was considered to be an agricultural town and the products being moved by rail. Here's an alfalfa mill. Do you remember where that was, Kathy? Was it close to here?
There were 3 of them and they all went down.
Yeah.
At Pepper Tree.
By what?
Where Pepper Tree neighborhood is.
Oh, okay. I'm told this is where the Pepper Tree housing development is? Yeah. Okay. So, and there were 3, Kathy says there were 3 of them. It looks like a wooden structure, and so eventually it fell apart, I guess. So there's the depot, and to the left of the depot you see a sidetrack with some boxcars on there, and there's all sorts of interesting things going on. And in the background is the beet dump. So one of the main bases of the agricultural economy in this area was sugar beets. So this is an ingenious device from the old days, the beet dump. So the farmers would pull their wagons full of sugar beets up here and then dump them down into the gondolas. So the CNS stands for Colorado and Southern. So the railroad that came through here in the 1870s was the Colorado and Southern. It went through an evolution of various names. One of the things that happened on the railroad was they had something called a railway post office car, full of employees of the post office who sorted letters, and as they went down the tracks, they'd stop at Longmont at the depot, and since it was such a big city, and pick up the mail. But Niwot, being smaller, did a kind of a run-by, a drive-by pickup here. Here's Miss Haddon, there's the depot, and this right here is the mail pouch. So that way the train could come through town. The the railway post office car staff, one of them would pull down on the lever and an arm would raise up and it would catch that leather mail pouch, and then they bring it into the post office car and sort the mail. And the other side of the coin is how they drop off the mail. Well, they literally dropped it off. They're going through, and somebody would kick it out the door, and it'd land on the platform. And I think for much of its lifetime, Niwot was what we call a whistle stop. They could stop so they got the signal to stop and pick up a passenger. Like this gentleman over here was talking about taking a train ride in 1946. And all the way from Boulder to Niwot, huh? Yeah, that's right. Long distance travel. And how about the snowstorm the blizzard of 1913, one of the top 4 or 5 blizzards in Colorado history. And there's your beautiful Main Street right there. And the depot would be in back of us. And there's the band shell. And that's probably the left-hand Grange, I bet. Anyway, there we are, battling the snow. Now there's a section of track that a section crew would be in charge of maintenance on, and every section crew had a foreman, so Mr. Apodaca was the foreman, and they'd take care of 10 to 15 miles of track, maybe upwards of 20, and so there'd be a lot of section houses along the railroad, and where they kept their equipment and their little hand cars and things like that. And can you imagine just walking down here a few hundred yards and to the train depot and getting on a passenger train and being in Denver in a couple of hours and maybe Chicago the next day. So here we see passengers assembled at the Niwot Depot. Okay, so the topic is transporting coal. I just made up a new word, didn't I? Transportating the coal. So what is coal? Well, I hope if there are any geologists in the audience, I hope I don't commit too many errors here, but coal is formed by the creation of organic matter being compressed into this organic material called coal. And this area where we live now is once underwater, tropical growth, and over the years, all this dirt, dead plants, animals too, were compressed down into this material that end up being various forms of coal. And coal is, the darker and harder it is, the better quality it is. And the so-called brown coal is not very good quality. And another demonstration of that is that soft coal was dirty coal, and hard coal would be clean burning coal, as clean as possible. And that's anthracite coal. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on. And if you've been to the British Isles, you know that they burn peat a lot in their fireplaces in Scotland, Ireland, and England, and Wales. And it's not peat moss. It's this organic material being compressed together so where it's flammable and it'll burn slow and hot. If it could keep on going for another few million years, it could become coal. And in Colorado, Colorado had a good coal mining history. Here's our area. This is the northern Colorado coal field, southern Colorado coal field. There's a field there by Canyon City and Florence. There's the North Fork Valley over by Peonia, over by Gunnison, around Glenwood Springs, and then up here by Craig. There's also Oak Creek. I don't know if you've been to Oak Creek, Colorado. That was an old coal mining town too. And in Boulder County, and actually technically in Weld County too, here's what the coal field looked like. Started over by Marshall and went clear out to what they call the Tri-Cities, Frederick, Firestone, and Decano. These, and then Erie, Lafayette, Louisville, and Superior. So this is coal mine country, where this part of Boulder County, and there's your part of Boulder. Your part of Boulder County where it's more agricultural. Coal was used in a variety of ways. Mostly, of course, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was the source of fuel for steam power. Before electricity, industries were filled with boilers and great deposits of coal, and some guys whose job was to be a stoker and keep the coal, shoveling the coal into the fires to, well, in hard rock mines, for example, they'd have 2 or 3 boilers at a hard rock mine to operate the hoist, bring out the ore cars and that sort of thing. Actually, any industry using steam power is going to be using coal. Also, of course, to heat homes, power plants that got into the electrical age, mills, smelters. The air hasn't always been clean and pristine in Colorado. And back in the days of burning coal, it was the air got pretty thick with a lot of coal smoke in the air. Railroads, like this one example here, is that we have a coaling tower down at Chama, New Mexico. So our steam locomotives, of course, had to have coal as a fuel too. So that meant they'd had to be mined and transported to the various places where they would have these coaling stations. You can still see that today. You know, there's the Chama, the Cumberson Toltec Scenic Railroad goes from Chama, New Mexico to Antonito, Colorado. It's a great steam locomotive powered tourist railroad. So here's Aspen, 1882, no skiers. And, but this was kind of like the Promontory Point scene here, where here's our first trains, Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad into Aspen, no trees. Well, the trees were cut down by the miners. The miners weren't known as being very good conservationists, and so the miners used them in the supports in the mines, and also they burned made charcoal with it for fuel. So what I'm getting at with this slide is to say that there's a need for coal because it burned better, more efficiently than wood products did. So I'm going to focus for a minute on the Colorado Fuel and Iron Corporation down in Pueblo, called the Pittsburgh of the West. At one time it was one of the top 10 steel producing mills in the United States. So most of the coal mined in Colorado went right down to Pueblo to the steel mill. And if you can imagine, shows what's changed in our state by these days. There's no tourist industry or high-tech industry. It was industrial work. 10%, 1 out of every 10 people in Colorado in the workforce worked somehow connected with the CF&I. John Osgood's the guy that founded it, eventually became part of the Rockefeller empire. And maybe you've seen this house over by Redstone, upstream in the Crystal River Valley from Carbondale. That was his humble abode, Mr. Osgood's. But he did have a pretty benevolent attitude toward the employees. That town of Redstone, if you've been there, that was a company town, and he provided, and the Redstone Inn was a facility for the workers, for unmarried workers to live there and recreate there. Oops, wrong button. And it's kind of interesting to compare that with a typical miner's house. So not quite as lavish, I think. So now we're mining coal, and it's going to go make steel, be part of the steel making process. So the railroads were the main way, not almost the only way, to get the coal from the source to the mill. So the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad especially was founded around that idea. There's the steel mills in Pueblo. Again, not exactly where you'd send your tuberculosis people to recover from. It was, Pueblo was infamous for having some pretty dirty air. So they also produced coke, which was a high quality fuel where they heated the coal and created this material called coke. And it was part of the process of making steel. And the best coal for that was this hard anthracite coal because of its burning qualities. And if you've been to Redstone, you know they've got some very nicely restored coke ovens there, because that was the main thing that was going on in Redstone, was the creation of coke. And where do you get anthracite coal in Colorado? Believe it or not, Crested Butte is the source of the anthracite here in the state. And they say, I read someplace, so I hope it's a good source, it's the only anthracite deposit of any size west of Pennsylvania. So the big mine there at Crested Butte was the big source of high quality coal for CF&I. And it was transported out of that valley, Crested Butte, the East River, down to Gunnison, on the DNRG Railroad, the Denver and Rio Grande, narrow gauge. And I'll explain narrow gauge in a minute. So here's the big mine at Crested Butte. Now, I spent some of my life across Kebler Pass in Paonia, and I remember when they closed the big mine, and all these guys who came over the hill from Crested Butte hoping they could get a job in the mines in Paonia and Somerset. And weren't all able to get employment. But we think of Crested Butte with its Fat Tire Bike Festival and the wildflowers and skiing and all that sort of thing. But it was a place that was pretty rough and tumble place at one time. Oh, and did you know, how's this for a side trip? Crested Butte is also famous for having two-story outhouses because the snow got so deep that they couldn't, they had trouble getting out of their homes and into their regular outhouse, so they just, okay, well, let's add another story on it. And I won't go into more detail than that. But, so the big mine at Crested Butte was Colorado's third largest coal mine, 400 men, 70 mules. Now, the reaction to that oftentimes is, what? Mules? What you talking about? And the deal is that, again, this is before an electric motor or some kind of internal combustion engine could be used in the mines, so they had mules in the mines during the mining season, which is usually October to May. Over in Superior in our mine, they talk a lot about how they'd bring the old-timers talk about the mules coming out of the mine after being in there throughout the mining season, and put them in a corral, and they couldn't, they were blind because of they'd been in the dark for months, and it took them a couple of weeks to get their sight back. To the mine owners, we'll hint about the benevolence of the mine owners. If there was a disaster in the mine, oftentimes their first question was, how many mules did we lose? Because the mules would cost $500 or $600 a piece. The miners, there's another, if you lose a miner, there's two other guys out waiting out at the gate to come in and take his place. So the mules are very important to the miners. I heard someplace it takes about 100 feet of organic material to make 1 foot, as it gets compressed, 1 foot of coal. And so this mine, our mine in Superior was about 8 feet, coal seam was about 8 feet deep. Here we see that 10 to 20 feet thick of anthracite coal in Crested Butte. Another scene of the big mine. You can see the little narrow gauge locomotive down here for Rio Grande Railroad. When I was over there in the Western Slope, I always heard about Floresta, there was this big trestle going into this place called Floresta. So this is even higher in elevation than Crested Butte, 10,000 feet of elevation. They were able to find a deposit of anthracite coal, and it was a very difficult place to mine, obviously with the snow accumulation and what have you, so it never went any farther than that. I think they were going to try to take it over the divide and down toward Grand Junction, the railroad that is. There's Mount Crested Butte, and there's the town, and there are the coke ovens. So sometimes they'd coke it right there on site, sometimes they'd transport it to a site where there were coke ovens. So now we've got a load of coal going to Pueblo. And going over the mountains, they started off the railroad development by doing narrow gauge. And so narrow gauge went down to Gunnison, over Monarch Pass to Salida. Now we're going to meet up with a standard gauge. So we got a problem here. Narrow gauge is only 3 feet wide, 3 feet between the rails. And standard gauge is 4 feet, 8.5 inches. So what they'd have to do originally was have a crew of men who literally shoveled the coal out of the narrow gauge gondolas into the standard gauge gondolas until they developed this contraption. So a lot of times, what do they say? Necessity is the mother of invention. So here's what they called the barrel transfer. So they'd bring in here's the narrow gauge line, here's the standard gauge. They'd bring the narrow gauge cars in here. This thing would rotate. Well, they secured it first, of course, and then it would dump the coal into the standard gauge car. Here's another scene, a little different perspective in living color. So that was something that developed, I thought would be an interesting sidelight for you to know. Salida was a huge railroad town. It was about the only reason for it to exist. And I was down in there a few years ago where the rail yards were, and there's no remnants whatsoever. It's really hard to believe, because there were a lot of facilities there. Well, also there's a lot of labor and management issues with the people mining the coal and the managers of their mines. These are miners' ID tags, about the size of a quarter, and notice there's a number on there. We lost these in the fire too, I guess. And so these served a number of purposes. So a miner would have a handful of those. For one thing, I'd hang one on the board when we went into the mine, the board with a nail on it. And that way, everybody knew who was in the mine. So if there was a disaster, people would come out and they'd take their tag off the board. And if they got to a certain point and they said, oh, we still have 350 still down in the mine, so they know there's somebody left in the mine. But the other thing they did was back in the days, they got paid by the ton. How you like the stack of that coal? They got paid by the ton. How do they know whose coal it was? So what they would do is the miner would shovel the coal into the mine car, and then he'd put his tag on that, and then when to get weighed, they'd credit him with whatever the weight was. And an example, by the way, I think this was a photo op. I think they were bragging about because they wouldn't normally load it up quite that much. But if a fella loaded coal got almost 60 cents a ton, can you imagine loading 2,000 pounds of coal and getting 60 cents? You get about a little over $3 a day. So when they had labor problems, one of the main things they wanted to do is get paid by the hour rather than by the ton. The old 16-ton song had a lot of truth to it. I'm sure all of you remember that one too. So in Colorado, there was a long strike in those years from 1910 to 1914, and they wanted to increase in wages. They wanted an 8-hour workday because they were working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And there was something called dead work, and that means if you worked in the mine, you went in and you had to spend an hour or two working on the beams and supports and cleaning up around the mine and maybe doing general maintenance. You didn't get paid for that. You only got paid for what you put in the mine car. And then the other issue was that the weighmen oftentimes wouldn't give them full credit. You know, they would kind of cheat them on the weight. And the weighmen were in a tough place because they were getting pressure from the management. Don't put your thumb on the scale, so to speak. And the miners were saying, God, you're one of us. Why aren't you giving us what we deserve? And so they wanted the right to select who would weigh their coal. So this was a long strike. 3,000 miners go on strike. It started up here in the northern Colorado fields, in Lafayette and Louisville primarily, and then went down into the southern field down by Trinidad and Walsenburg. And in some cases, well, they hired scabs, the mine companies did, and they also oftentimes even went so far as to have a machine gun nest to keep the strikers out and the strike breakers in. They put a fence around the mines and all that sort of thing. Columbine Mine, south of here, between Erie and Lafayette, different strike, but the guys actually opened fire on the miners and killed 8 of them and they searchlights, armored cars, and they hired the militia. That was a militia, but it was really just a kind of a private army for the mine owner. The end of the strike ended after the infamous Ludlow massacre down in southern Colorado near Walsenburg, and however it started, who knows? But when they opened fire, ended up with 21 fatalities, and you'll see different numbers on how many people were killed in this, because it wasn't very precise. Because so many of them were immigrants, sometimes they didn't even know who the fatality was. For the entire strike and all throughout the state, again, not very precise numbers, and it is literally the deadliest strike in history of the United States. Well, I'm only putting this in here because it just wasn't a simple thing. Okay, we're going to mine the coal, dump it in a car, and take it off to the steel mill. It was very involved in a lot of ways. So another example of the dangers, since it was a very dangerous profession to start with, and even more so in Colorado, sadly, the Hastings mine explosion down not too far from Ludlow, actually. 121 fatalities and 23 mules were killed in this massive explosion. Ludlow's out here someplace. I-25 would be out in that area, south of Walsenburg. And so here's the explosion, entombs 125 persons in mine. This happened frequently, not the fatality numbers quite like that, but it's happened all throughout the United States, especially in Appalachia and Illinois. There was a mine explosion in Illinois. I think it was 375 miners were killed in Cherry Mine there in northern Illinois. I just found this fascinating when I was doing the research on this incident, that the nationality, these were immigrants, these were people who came from some other place. By the way, a lot of times you run across Austrians. Back in those days, it was still the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Austria-Hungary. So these were Slavic, from Croatia and Slovenia and so on, but they would put Austria on their information sheets because it was Austria-Hungary. I wonder what that meant. And one Spaniard, that poor guy. A lot of times what the mine owners did is purposely keep the population of the miners diverse, because then they couldn't communicate with each other. They couldn't complain about their treatment, but also then they had trouble when there was a disaster, because that hampered the rescue effort too. Okay, so times changed. The guys got unionized. They got the 8-hour work day and got a decent wage, but it was spotty. It's something, again, there's no more demand in the summertime for the coal, or less demand, then they cut back on the crews to a skeleton crews. But after the war, demand for the coal decreased, and especially with the improvement of delivery of natural gas to people's homes, so they could use that as the fuel, not coal. So, but there's still a demand in some industries and power plants. So now I'm going to get around to this topic here. I told you I would some point. So you came up with the idea of unit trains. So here's what's sadly, in my opinion, going on up in northwest Colorado is open pit mines, where they just use these gigantic shovels and dump trucks and scrape off the surface and then pull out the coal. So this cleared back in the 70s. So this is not new. Near Gillette, Wyoming. So a lot of the coal we're going to talk about comes from Powder River Basin in Wyoming or Routt County in Colorado. So Wyoming has really become quite a coal-producing state thanks to this ability to get it through an open pit mine operation. So here's a typical unit train. 130 cars. Back in the 70s, now we're talking 150 cars in a train. The trains are 1.5 miles long. So I think you get maybe one a day through here. Remember the barrel transfer? So where do they go? They go to places like power plants in Texas. Houston seems to be one of the big destinations for this Wyoming coal. And so when it gets to the power plant, they use that same principle to empty the cars there. And that would go for a lot of other power plants too, but especially that big operation in Texas. So the Denver and Rio Grande, now that was, the previous pictures were Burlington Northern trains. Now it's BNSF. And the Rio Grande also did unit trains. This is Phippsburg up by, up in Grand County, up near Granby. And this is all coming from the open pit mines over by Craig, Colorado. So there's a joint line that goes between Denver and Colorado Springs. What it really amounts to is two lines, one's one way south and the other one's one way north. So the Burlington Northern Santa Fe runs about 15 trains a day now. Used to be more than that. Union Pacific about one day. So the Union Pacific would be coming through the Moffat Tunnel from the western slope. And essentially all of this coal is from Powder River Basin of Wyoming, Moffat County, and Somerset, in Delta and Gunnison County. And it's going on to Texas or western Kansas. Now, why, this didn't come out real clear, I apologize for that. Why are there not 12, 14 trains through Niwot every day? It's because here's the Powder River Basin and there's Alliance, Nebraska. They send it out to western Nebraska, down to Sterling and Brush, and then to Denver that way. So that takes it off of this main line from Denver to Cheyenne that goes right through your beautiful city. And so that explained that, why I solved the mystery of why I didn't understand why you weren't complaining about 12 trains a day coming through here with 150 cars on them. When they're up there at the mine, they call it a silo, where they bring the coal up out of the, well, the coal is dumped out of the dump trucks into the silos. And the silo empties into the rail cars. The rail car has a mine employee is in the cab of the locomotive, and he sets it so it goes 0.6 miles an hour, and so that it's being filled as the train goes through the silo. And so they've got it all figured out, so they have a certain rate of the coal coming out of the silo, so that by the time 150 cars go through there, every car is loaded. And it creates this 1.5 mile long train. Each coal car weighs 18,000 tons. One of the reasons why rail advocates are so obsessed with safety is because people take a chance to run across in front of a train, or to hop a train, or to try to beat a train going across through a crossing. So you imagine all that weight and putting on all the brakes, and it would just slide for 1.5 miles before it come to a stop. So the rail safety people go out and talk to kids, talk about how, you know, if you were to go out there as a human or within a car, it would be like squashing a soda pop can. And well, the future, you know, that they're moving away from so-called dirty coal. And the coal advocates, they keep saying it's not dirty. We have clean coal, but you know, you still can't get it completely clean. So it's just, they're shutting down mines. It's really going to be hard on Moffat County over by Craig. They're already going through a lot of anguish over what's going to happen with all their miners. So we're seeing a movement away from coal and to other sources, and the coal miners and the coal managers both are not happy about that. But we'll do a real quick look through at the Colorado Railroad Museum. There it is at the base of North Table Mountain. We have old wooden observation car, railroad cars like this, diesels. That one towed the California Zephyr when in its prime. And we have one goes back to 1880 here, this little narrow gauge locomotive. It was in 1941, so there's a late model version of the steam locomotive. We have a contraption called a galloping goose. We have 3 galloping geese down there that were devised by the Rio Grande Southern Railroad to cope with the Depression. And we have live steam operations on a regular basis. I think we have 3 operating steam locomotives right now. And as we speak, Thomas the Tank Engine is visiting the Railroad Museum today, last weekend, this weekend, and next weekend. Do a few thousand people a day. These little tykes get to see their favorite little blue locomotive. He's a replica. This is actually doing the power. And also, I want to plan ahead. The Polar Express comes in November and December. Wonderful experience. It is really a theatrical production. And it's very impressive. As you can see when it comes, it's at night and the kids come in their pajamas and get to have a cookie and a cup of hot chocolate and get entertained by all the little cooks dressed up. Let's see, I was going to say something else. Oh, Kathy mentioned that there are Boulder County free days. Raise your hand if you remember locomotive number 30 in the Central Park in Boulder. And yeah, a few of you, that locomotive is now at the Railroad Museum. We got an arrangement between the museum and Boulder, City of Boulder. So anybody, well, part of the deal is if you live in Boulder County and you can prove it, you get a free day at the museum. I forgot to include that in the slides. It's on the website for the museum. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, that since the caboose was at the end of the train, we have this symbolize the end of the program. And I'd love to respond to questions if you happen to have any. Thank you. Thank you. So, yes, ma'am.
So the coal up in the northwestern part, that was the anthracite, or you said by Crested Butte, but all the other coal mines, that was bituminous coal?
Yeah. Bituminous, and then there's variations. There's subbituminous. Most of the coal right around here was a little bit lower quality. And then the lignite, I think that's even lower quality. Yeah. But you know, the North Fork coal from the North Fork Valley in Paonia and Somerset, that's high. That's a really good quality coal, but it's not anthracite. I think it's spelled over here.
Yeah. I was wondering when the Crested Butte facility closed and when Paonia one opened, and there's a transfer and people wanted to work together. When was that? Was that because it became a ski town and everything? So I was wondering like what the time frame was.
Yeah. When they closed the big mine in 1954, and so I remember the people in the North Fork Valley reacting as some harebrained idiots are going to put a ski area in over in Crested Butte. What? And that was about 1960 to 64. Along in there is when Crested Butte ski area got started.
Did they run out of coal over there, or was it just economically?
Just economics, yeah. As far as I know, the coal is still there, but most of these places don't run out of coal. The demand goes down, even in this northern Colorado field, but it's not economically feasible to mine it, and the old mines they fill with water. They have and so to get the water out of it and all that sort of thing just isn't worth it. And the Paonia mine started in the 1880s, 1890s, so it's a similar vintage. Yeah. Yes, question over here?
Coal mine fires and abandoned coal mines.
Mm-hmm.
I heard something to the effect that there was a theory about the Marshall Fire
Yeah.
that started by underground coal
Yep.
fire.
That's, oh, it has a lot, yeah. One of the perils of coal mining is a fire, and because once it gets started, you can't get it out. So all throughout, I think I saw someplace there's something like 30 smoldering fires just in the state of Colorado currently, and these all went back to a long time ago. Over there in Paonia, there's one of the major mines has they've sealed off the shaft with concrete, but it still just smolders, and if it gets any oxygen, you might remember, I can't remember how many years ago it was now, but there was a mine, a fire over by Glenwood Springs, over by Newcastle, called the coal seam fire. And what that meant was that a seam separated, the oxygen got to the smoldering fire and it took off. So the Marshall Fire, the thing I read said the Marshall mine fire started around in the late 1860s even, but it's been smoldering on and off since then. And you used to be able to see it pretty regularly as you went south on Highway 93. It sounds like confirmed that, yeah. So that's a real deal for sure. Yes, ma'am.
I just have a general train question.
Okay.
We have friends coming to visit from Holland, and they would love to go take a train from Denver to Grand Junction just because the scenery.
Yeah.
Is there any, and so we're going to do that. with
Good
them.
deal.
So is there anything of note that you would recommend? Like make sure you see this part of it or?
Well, the Amtrak, that's an Amtrak train now, and the train has a special car where you can sit, cars going that way, and you can sit, is that perpendicular? I taught social studies, not math. And so you can see directly out the windows. It's not a dome car exactly, but it does have high visibility. And if you get on the right day, they'll have a docent who will be there to help explain things. But other than that, just keep an eye. Everything, the whole route is just so scenic. It's just very intriguing. Did you have a question too, ma'am? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, you're
I'm
welcome.
from Boston.
Oh.
So, I live here now.
Yeah, originally. Yeah.
Yeah, but my name is Maria Karagianis, which is Greek.
Uh-huh.
And I was fascinated. I had read about the Ludlow massacre and knew that they were a bunch of Greek immigrants who led it and all got killed.
Right.
So I have two questions. First, is Ludlow, I don't know exactly where I am. I mean, I do, but.
You're in Niwot. No.
No, I know. Foothills of the Rockies.
There you go.
Is Ludlow near here? Or?
No.
No.
It's down south of Walsenburg, and on I-25 going from Walsenburg to Trinidad, they have a sign up. It's signed, so it's pretty recognizable. And there is a monument there. It's about, 3 or 4 miles off the road, maybe.
Yeah, I was surprised. I've been reading about the history of Greek immigrants, and I had no idea there are a bunch of them out here who couldn't speak English, who were down in the mines. The other is just, again, a comment. My late father-in-law was Irish, but a coal miner in Scotland. He went into the mines, all the Irish immigrants, at 14. Big Tom, we called him. And the mines closed down after World War II and slowed down, and that's when he brought Katie, his wife, and 9 children, including my husband, Tim O'Neill, to Boston. But it was interesting because we went to, that town that had just been so wealthy with the coal mining and then just crashed after the war. Sorry to be yapping so much, but I guess the other thing that's fascinating to me is there's still a coal mining industry in Colorado. correct? And who were the miners? Just I mean, it's not immigrants like that anymore.
No, it's not immigrants anymore. Oh, so the question, I just remembered I was supposed to repeat the question. So,
It wasn't a question,
Yeah.
it was,
so this question was, what is the composition these days of coal miners? And it's mostly, I don't know, I guess I'd say blue-collar workers in the area. In modern times, the miners get paid pretty decently.
do they?
Yeah. So it was, and then you have the tradition, you know, like in the North Fork Valley, the guys who aren't even miners still are emotional about, you know, because his dad was a miner, or his dad got killed in the mine or something like that. So there's a tradition that goes along there. But I don't think it's anything that's really has an ethnic orientation to it like it used to.
Right.
Yeah.
Are they unionized? I mean,
Yeah. United Mine Workers.
Oh,
United Mine Workers, and when I go back over to Paonia, you got to be careful what I say. The union did a great job of improving the working conditions, but they're pretty political these days because of they see that this anti-coal faction in America. Yes, sir.
I was wondering how important was the Moffat Tunnel? Was that quite a game changer in terms of the coal industry?
Well, the Moffat Tunnel was a game changer for railroading in general because before the Moffat Tunnel, by the way, is west of Rawlinsville up in it's actually on South Boulder Creek watershed. And, excuse me. To get from what's now called the East Portal to the West Portal was 27 miles of railroad up over a 10,000-foot pass. And it was a tremendous demand on railroading because it was steep and windy, and also the wintertime, of course, would be the real hazard. They had to have special what's called rotary snow plows that turned like this, that were kind of like a snow blower, and had huge deposits of snow. At the peak of the pass, there's a place called Corona, that's why it's sometimes called Corona Pass, and it was all under snow sheds. They had to build snow sheds to essentially building a tunnel over the tracks, and the depot was all under the snow shed and everything. And they still had to close down frequently throughout the winter. So, yeah, so when they completed the Moffat Tunnel, that's a nice long tunnel, 6.2 miles, and that means, you know, in 15 minutes you're through it. Well, I think there was a bunch of good questions. I just compliment you on the quality of your questions, and if you'd like to come up and visit a little bit more, come on down. Otherwise, I'll see if I can make up another one and come back again someday. Since now I didn't see any tomatoes coming my way. So thank you very much, and thanks Kathy and to the Historical Society for having me in today.